and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I get to talk to the most fascinating people about history, their history, family history, and today is no exception. I'd like you to meet
I'm Claudia Wagner.
Claudia. Welcome to Journeys and Journals.
Well, thank you, Bernie.
You've brought history.
As my children say, I am kind of a history nut. They are used to this for my family because that's one of the things that I truly love to do, starting with my own family and anything else I can find that has to do.
Starting with the Civil War.
Yes.
That is your family.
That is my family.
You can trace your life back to this guy.
This was my great-grandfather. I can actually trace him back farther than that, clear back to the Revolutionary War, if I really want to go that far, because I have. But I was a history student, a history major in college a few years back. I didn't get a chance to go when I was young, right out of school. So when my children were in school, I had an opportunity, and I said I wanted to go back and study history. So for my senior project, that we were required to do something, and we could either study some other history book or something, and I asked if I could do research on my own family, because I had known, my father had always said that his grandfather had been in the Civil War, and so I started researching and finding out what I could do. And so I was able to find this. We were able to go back.
This is schoolwork?
This was schoolwork. Most fun schoolwork I have ever done. This was why it was fully documented, everything. I don't always do everything with all the citations and everything, but I did for the project, obviously, for my class. But this was my great-grandfather, Morris Eels, and this is, I have a picture in here of him and his wife. We actually got to go, he was born in upstate New Morris, New York, and Morris came out to Minnesota, and he had been married and his wife had passed away, and so he and his 2-year-old son and his brother and his brother's family moved out to Minnesota. I'm not sure why they moved to Minnesota, but that was where he met my great-grandmother and married her, and this was before the Civil War. While they were out there, President Lincoln had called for more volunteers because he needed more people in the war. So in 1862, he and his brother enlisted at Fort Snelling, Minnesota.
Oh, you know all this
because
you had to do it for school, huh?
Well, yes, and because it was so interesting to me. And so we got a chance to go back to Walton, New York, and find the
Who's
place.
we?
My husband and I. My husband, Ed, or Orvin. He was known as Orvin, but he goes by Ed most of the time.
Okay, now Ed is his profession?
He is a PhD in physics, and so he
taught school in?
He taught school at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. He taught physics there, and then he came up here and started teaching out at Rogue Community College.
So that's...
But he's retired, obviously. We both retired now.
Okay. Now, how did you get the pictures?
They were part of our family albums and things. We had the pictures of...
And who are these folk?
This was my great-grandmother, Mary Ann Eels, and this was Morris Eels.
You know, I just learned why they always look so glum or solemn. It's because it took a long time for the shutter to close.
That's very true.
And so you had to sit
very, very still.
Exactly the same.
Or it would destroy your picture, yes.
Yeah.
But we had those in the family albums and things, so it was very interesting to be able to get those and then to go back and see the places where he actually had lived and learn some of the history about them.
What a vacation.
Oh, it was wonderful. I had a great time. And we found out that during the Civil War, right after they had enlisted, this was at the time when the Sioux Nation had been put on reservations and were supposed to be getting subsidies from the government, and they were supposed to be getting gold and everything. Well, during the Civil War, it was very hard for them to get the gold, to pay them what they were supposed to have. So they were trying to get them to use script, and the Native Americans did not like that. They were promised gold and they wanted gold. So there was some uprisings. They had left the reservation and there was some killings. So there was some times when the family was in, they thought, danger. So the first part of the Civil War, he spent it on during the Indian campaign. And during this time, they went from Minnesota and they went clear over to the Yellowstone River and clear up to the English border, which wasn't even Canada then, it was still England.
And how in the world they transferred all these military people?
Well, they went up the Missouri River on barge, a lot of it, and then they also they rode horses. They had, there was an account in the regimental history about them getting some green broken ponies for all of these people. And some of them had really, they were used to riding horses, but not that much because they were farm boys. And they said they had quite some time breaking these horses in to be able to allow them to ride on out for their campaign. But by the time they had gotten very far, they were very seasoned on it. So. And they were some of the first white people to see the northern Black Hills and the Badlands up in through there. And in their army that was coming through there were some of the first to come down through there. But and they had a few Indian battles that was coming up in there, but mostly a lot of the Native Americans had escaped to Canada across the border. So they came back to Minnesota, and then from there they went to Tennessee.
You're saying they were military men and they went where they were told to go.
They went where they were told to go. Very interesting concept. That's what they usually do. But they had one of the widest ranges of any of the regiments because they had been that far out west. Then they came back to Tennessee. Then they went to Washington, D.C. and camped out at Washington, D.C. and ended up the war in Raleigh, North Carolina.
So not only east to west, but north to south, and
almost everywhere. And they had all kinds of transportation. They had from horses, they had on the barges on the two rivers from there. They had train rides over the mountains from Wheeling, West Virginia to over across the mountains. They went on the ocean-going ships to go around from the Potomac back into Raleigh, North Carolina.
So all this is in this book, and you said it's documented with footnotes.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
So it was so much fun to do the research on it. It was amazing.
Now this is your birth family.
This is my birth family.
And you found all these things. Have you found cousins in the process of doing this? I mean, is it a...
Well, my family has been pretty close. My dad and most of his family moved around a lot, and they moved around together.
Oh.
And so they started out in Minnesota. After the war, he came back to Minnesota, Morris Eels, and they moved their family to Kansas. And there, he passed away in Kansas. And then my great-grandmother and the boys, all of her family, moved to Oklahoma and started their families. From Oklahoma, they migrated out to Idaho, and they came out to Idaho. And from there to here, and my great-grandmother actually, Mary Ann, actually died here in Grants Pass and is buried out at Granite Hill Cemetery.
Now that is a historic cemetery.
It is.
It's vintage. That would be 1939, I believe, or in the 30s, I believe, 30s or maybe early 40s. Well, we're glad that brought you here to college.
It did. Well, and my family, my mother and father, they also moved around a lot. They
How did they move? I mean, what did you pack to move, and how did you come? Do you know anything about this pioneer moves?
Well, not as much about my great-grandmother's family. My father, his family moved out to Idaho. A lot of times they traveled around so many times. When I was doing the research about this, I had to look on all of these various states to where they had been, and they'd have a child born in half a dozen different states. I mean, they're just every couple of years they were in a different state somewhere. So I'm not sure how probably a lot of it was with horse and wagon. But my mother's family came out a lot on the train after the trains came out.
Ah.
And so they were able to ride the trains out as far as they could. And
Do you know how they brought their things? Did they have a boxcar or?
well, I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. They probably some of the early ones. My parents, even after they were married, though, they met up in Washington, up around Yakima, Washington. They were working in the fruit up there. They were kind of migrant workers at the time.
Does that explain how these people move so much?
A lot of it was. A lot of it was they were moving from farm to farm that were not as successful of farms, I suppose, or they wanted to find thought it would be better somewhere else, or they were migrant workers. They followed crops sometimes. And so then when my parents were in Washington working, and then that's where they met, and they got married up there. And my mother's very first home was a tent in the apple orchards.
Oh my
She was
goodness.
17, my dad was 23. And there was a picture that we have in our family albums, and I believe it's in the book about my family, of her sitting in front of her tent in the apple orchard. She said she almost lost her first home because Daddy had to fall a tree for some reason or another and almost fell it right across her tent, her very first home. But it survived, and so did everyone else.
How about this?
Yes, that was my mother's very first home. She said that actually, she thought the whole livelihood and way of life went downhill a little bit when they did away with the wooden apple boxes, because she said that was her tables, that was her cupboards, that was her dressers, that was almost everything. And then they were already packed every time they had to move.
Oh, I love it. I have a real love for wooden boxes. It's just something I've always loved since I had little dolly dishes and all that and a little curtain on the front.
Oh, always had curtains, because those were flour sacks. You'd use the flour sack curtains.
Oh, sure.
Of course. And
some of them even came printed.
Oh,
That's later.
well, I think she had some that she said that were actually printed. This was in the 1928 was when they were married. And so
I interviewed someone, and they said they would send Dad to buy, provisions. Say, now you be sure to buy all the flour sacks alike, because I'm going to be making a dress for Susie or whatever.
oh yes.
Now, when you came out west, and here's the guy you married.
That's the guy I married. Yes.
And who are all these?
All right. This is my family. Of course, my husband, I've known him most as Ed or Orvin. This is my oldest son, Ray, and his wife, Jennifer, and their son. My second son, Michael, and then my daughter, Kimberly, and her husband, Randy Garver, the Garvers, and their two of their little children. And since this picture was taken, Ray and Jennifer have one more little one, and Kim and Randy have another little boy.
Yeah, we got pictures of them too.
I think we do somewhere.
Yes,
but-
trust me, we do.
But
The family history has been archived, but you not only appreciate what you've done, you appreciate other people's
Oh,
work.
absolutely, absolutely. The book that you're holding there was done for I believe it was the centennial of the Jerome Prairie School. Right now, I understand that they're going to be closing it this year, after the end of this year. The population has gone down, and it is an very old school. It's been there a long time. It was started 1871. And when my parents moved back over here they had lived here in the 30s, and they moved back to Idaho, and then they came back in 1946. And so almost all of my brothers and sisters and I all went to Jerome Prairie School. And so it's very interesting tradition for all of us, so it's kind of a little bit nostalgic to see the school going away, because to know that we all walked those halls. I had an opportunity to go and work with one of the teachers this last Christmas to do the winter program, and as I walked in, I said it was quite a feeling of, oh, how this has changed, but yet how it's still the same. And I had to tell her students, she had 3rd and 4th graders, I told them, I said, the room right down there at the very end was where I started school 50 years ago.
Wow.
And they was like, oh, you must be really old. Yes, I am. But it was very fun. And it was very nice to be able to go back and see that they're still working really hard for children, and it was great.
And it used to be that there weren't buses. In fact, they coming to that school, I'm told, had to come by ferry boat from over the other side of the Rogue River.
Probably not too much in the way of the Rogue River, but the Applegate River. They had, because they came from, that was after they closed the Wilderville School, and they brought them to Jerome Prairie. That was well before my time.
Obviously, I hear stories about horses, horse-drawn school.
Well, I think by the time we came, of course, by the time we came there in 1946, they had buses for everything that we did. But we lived within about a half a mile of the school. My parents weren't really too great about having us walk to school. It was only a very rare occasion when we were able to do that, because we had a very, very busy highway with not really good shoulders, and they were very worried about us walking down there because of the traffic. But we rode our bikes down, or we would walk down to school at times, but we mostly rode the bus, and we had those. But I was in the last 6th grade class. I mean, the last class when I was in 6th grade was just before they built, moved the 7th and 8th grade to Lincoln Savage.
Oh, yeah.
So I got to be one of the very first classes at Lincoln Savage out there. So that was really fun too. Made kind of a different change in the.
Oh yes, going to the big school.
Yes, we were going. Well, we got to help choose the mascot and the school colors and all of these things that we were doing for that particular time, because it was a brand new school.
And I got to do that at Milo, because it was a brand new school and they didn't have school colors or any of those things.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
There's so much about you that fascinates me, and that's why I invited you. I'm sure that people are saying, Wagner, are you related to those Wagner electronic people?
I sure am. I had the fortune to marry into that family. So Delmer is my brother-in-law, my husband's brother, younger brother, and then Ed Wagner, that runs Wagner Electronics, is the nephew, and so it's been a very wonderful family.
And where do you live?
Well, I live in Weimar, so I'm out of Rogue River. We're up in Weimar area, and we live just across the creek from Delmer and Ed's home place. Was where their mother raised them after their father was killed, and he was an X-ray technician over at Ashland Hospital, and he was riding his bike to work one day, and a student came across an intersection and hit him, and knocked him off his bicycle, and that killed him. He was only in his 30s. And so Mother Wagner raised her family, her 3 children, Delmer and Ed and their sister Elaine. She raised them by teaching for the conference for the schools, and she homeschooled part of them. She did part of them was church school, and part of the times they would spend the winters around at different places and teaching school, and she'd come back in the summer, raise crops there. And her brother had lived across the creek in the home we're living in now, but we've changed it a lot since we had it. We've added on, we've remodeled, but
My friend Bill Young used to say, nothing grow out there. It was except rocks. Lots of rocks.
That's not always quite true, because we have a pretty good place. We have an orchard, we have area that when we had our children at home, mainly we had large gardens that they would help us, but we don't need that much anymore, and it's too much work, so we don't do that anymore. But no, we have. We were right on Sykes Creek, and so Sykes Creek property, the Sykes Creek runs right through our property, and so we were able to do that. And I had always wondered why, because his mother was from South Dakota. She was raised in South Dakota on a farm in South Dakota, and I always wondered, why did they come out to Oregon? It didn't make sense to me. Why? How did they ever know what was here? Why would they come out here? Because they had a nice farm back there, and they'd raised there, and they'd homesteaded it, and that was actually their homestead property. But I got to doing a little more research on his family a little bit too, because I'm working on all angles here. So I talked to. I knew that she had gone out to school out at Loma Linda. She was going to study nursing, and that's where she met Delmer and Ed's father. He was studying to be the X-ray technician down there at Loma Linda. And I got to think, well, they knew the area out here, but what I was wanting to do was figuring out, okay, why would they come here? And then I got to talking to my stepson, and he was saying because they needed to find a place to flee to the mountains. Because
I hear you. This is really. I talked with another family, and they told me that they had gone to that very area during the flu epidemic. Mother was 2 or 3 little kids. Said, "What can I do to save my children?"
Right.
We'll go to the end of the road. And that's really was way back.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, there's a stack of things I'd like to ask you about. You've brought wonderful pictures. How is it that this old fella gets in here with this younger fella and this young fella?
Okay, this was an early ancestor of mine. He was in the 1600s and lived in the Connecticut colony, and way back, came here in about 1630 with his family, and then settled here. This was Samuel Eels. And then this picture is of my father and mother in about the 30s. And just the family resemblance is amazing.
Okay.
And then this is my oldest son. And that was what I was looking, I got to looking at these pictures, and I thought, boy, the family resemblance was so strong in all of these.
Genetics is true.
So it was very interesting to be able to do this, to have this type of a follow.
Well, folks, I just have gotten acquainted because Evelyn Wagner was my guest 2 weeks ago, and this brought us together. And then I learned about you sing.
Yes, I do.
not
Yes, I
only
do.
sing, but lead the,
Well, I don't lead the chorus. I just help do a lot of the work of putting things together for when we do our shows.
because the chorus is more people than this, about
Yes.
20?
There's about, I think there's almost, we're getting almost 30, so we've got about 27, I think, or something like
And
that now.
You know, it's public presentations, well worth going to see, because I was lucky enough to go to this silly one.
Oh, we have a lot of silly ones. This was one of our more calm ones. We create our own shows. We find our costuming, we find our decorations for our sets and things in very unusual places. We find Christmas decorations that become necklaces. We find all kinds of decorations, depending on what our show is going to be about. And
I was so pleased to get to be there and hear it.
well, and the very important part that we do on this is because with our chorus, the people who help support our chorus help support our local kids. Because we took on a project several years ago that we would help fund the music programs in the schools.
Because they cut back.
They do cut back, and that's one of the first places. So that's where we ended up, and part of our proceeds go to that to help fund some of
Well, I thank you for caring for kids and
Oh, we
for
do.
music and all this. Our time's up. I hope you'll come back.
Oh, I would love to.
I'm Bernie Martin Beck saying thanks for tuning in. See you again.